and welcome back to my channel where I'm going to cover the Cleric's Order Domain class specialization from Tasha's Guide to Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass as well as explain and set up the various features gained. In societies, there generally are leaders who craft laws the populace are usually required to follow, and the clerics of this domain see these laws as their guidepost in life. Order Domain clerics are those who will immediately follow an order to the letter of the law without question, unless the leaders of the system have been deemed to have failed to protect the laws as they are written. In the latter case, clerics of this domain would be heavily involved in ensuring those who fail to protect the laws are replaced with those who will do a better job. And this is where it can get interesting, because those of an evil god, such as Bane for example, who are typically tyrannical in their enforcement of the laws, will have a cadre of clerics of this domain to help enforce those laws, while clerics of other gods will respect, enforce, and work to better the laws to ensure fairness to all, but still within the definition of the laws as they are written, and they will most likely be less heavy-handed than those of an evil cadre. Both styles of clerics will use their logic to ensure the validity of any law as it is written, and to ensure faults defined within the laws are removed, and many of these kinds of clerics will typically be near or even on the ruling councils to ensure order is maintained. However, it is still possible to find clerics of this domain traveling among parties and other adventurers to ensure that those laws are adhered to through any realm that they pass through. Clerics are one of the few classes that choose their specialization as the character is being crafted, simply because their domain dictates what spells they will start off with. But this video is going to focus entirely on the Order Domain, so if you're looking to get an idea on the basics behind crafting a cleric, I highly recommend you watch the video where I create a life domain cleric, as it is linked in the description below. Additionally, later on when I recorded the Forge Domain cleric, I made some optimizations to the class's configuration, so I highly recommend you also watch that one to figure out what those are, and I will also link that one in the description below. Sadly, however, the Life Domain Cleric video was using my old video format, where I tried to cram everything into one video. As a result, it's a bit long-winded. I apologize for that, but it does go into quite a bit of detail in the initial setup of Cleric class and ensures the basics are configured that will complement the subclass itself. So before I continue, I'm going to have to go ahead and create an initial level 1 Cleric so that we can progress through the rest of this video. So I will bring you back when I select the actual class specialization, and then we will move on to the actual details of the Order Domain. So I'm at the point now where I need to choose the class. In the character wizard, when you do this now, you will be prompted for your class specialization, as you can see down here. And in this particular case, I'm going to choose the Order Domain. And as you can see, it will update your specialization field down here to indicate that you are of the Order Domain. And that is the only change that really happens when it comes to setting up a cleric class versus the old method in going through the character wizard before. So I'm going to go ahead and finish out the rest of this class, and then I'll bring you right back. So the first feature your character will gain once the character has been created is called Domain Spells of the Order Domain, and it becomes available to your character at the time of creation. This feature grants your character spells that you will learn automatically at the clerical levels defined, so Compulsion and Locate Creature, for example, are required when your character reaches clerical level 7. You gain 2 spells at level 1, but also gain 2 new spells for every 2 levels up to level 9. So this includes levels 3, 5, 7, and 9. These spells do not count against your prepared spells list, and in fact, they are always available for you to use. They will not impact the number of spells you can prepare each day. The only restriction is that in order to cast a spell, you must still have a free spell slot that you can use. Now, when your character is created, the feature should already be applied to your character class, and we can see that right here. So there's nothing you need to do to add this to your actual character sheet. However, you probably should choose the initial set of spells, meaning dragging these 2 over into your class sheet and just drop them into place. And I'm going to get rid of that extra spell thing. And what that will do is that will add these 2 spells here into your class sheet. However, there is one thing you're going to want to do. Unfortunately, it's going to be very easy to mix up your domain spells with other spells that you want to be able to potentially swap out periodically. So I highly recommend you actually create a brand new spell group that will be set aside specific to your domain spells. And you do that simply by changing the actual group that the spell is list. So in this case, spells, and I'm going to call this the Order Cleric. Now what'll happen is that will actually create a brand new spell group down here, as we can see that. And I'm also going to do the same thing with heroism. Now we can see that these spells are grouped into the same clump, if you will. And the reason for that is these spells up here, you're going to want to prepare. These spells down here, you aren't going to want to prepare. You don't need to. Now there is a minor adjustment we're going to want to make. And that is because by default, this becomes an abilities group. We don't want that. What we want this to be is actually a spell group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this level 1 text here. And the reason being is when we switch this over to a spell group, it's automatically going to append, if you will, the level 1 or the level of the spell specific to that group. So I'm going to switch this simply by clicking on this icon. Now we can see that the level 1 is back, and these are now tagged as our spells. So if we go to combat and actions, we can see that we have our capabilities here. Now these ones need to be prepared. Technically, these do as well. And in fact, I don't know why this created this as an abilities group, because all of these should be spells. Now, cantrips, I can see that, but level 1 spells, this should be a spell group. There we go. So a minor adjustment you have to make to your actual character sheet here. Now, all the spells are available to you as a cleric. So all the ones that you chose during your character creation. These, however, will go away when they're prepared. So if you go into combat and then you actually go through, there we go, and cast one of these, technically it should go away once you have no spell slots. Excellent. That's exactly what we want, and it takes care of both the prepared group and the spells that you don't need to prepare. Also at level 1, your character is going to gain the bonus proficiencies of the order feature that grants your character proficiency with heavy armor and the intimidation or persuasion skills. Of those skills, you have to choose one of them. Now sadly, the character wizard doesn't always pick up on this particular feature when you choose the order domain. It doesn't adjust the proficiencies, doesn't present you the option to choose one, nor does it allow for heavy armor to be chosen as part of your inventory selection or item selection. So, as a DM, I would rule that you can go and change out the armor if you wish at this particular point in time, generally in my campaigns. Other DMs might not do that. They might require you to go buy it at a later point in time. But for anything that I do, I would allow you to just simply swap out the armor that you have in your inventory. And I'll show that here on this example. But first, I'm going to take care of the intimidation or persuasion skills. Now, I believe I might have already chosen persuasion. So that sort of leaves me with the intimidation skill, if you will, as the option that I want to go with here. Now, unfortunately, both of these are pretty poor stats for this particular character due to the fact that he has a 7 on the charisma, which means it's a -2 modifier. So now in relation to the armor, what you'll want to do is one of two things. You can go into here and you can look for a type here, specifically armor, and then go through the various types of armor that show up that are non-magical and choose one. I actually recommend an entirely different approach because you're going to be starting off with a very basic set of heavy armor, nothing magical, in most cases anyway. What you're going to want to do is go to the class sheet for the cleric from the player's handbook. And the reason why I suggest that is because at the bottom of that class sheet, it actually links you directly to the armor list table. And it makes it a little bit easier to select this. Now, one thing that I noticed is that this particular character already has chainmail. It's one of the things that I went through and set up for this particular character. So it is entirely possible that the character wizard is now in fact picking up the ability to wear heavy armor. Because the other two options were leather and chain shirt, I believe, or scale mail. Sorry, it was scale mail. So in this particular case, I don't have to worry about making an adjustment. But if you did choose leather or the scale mail option and it didn't present you the chainmail option and you wanted to choose chainmail, I would allow you to do so at this particular point in time. So the last feature you gain at level 1 is called Voice of Authority, which has a very interesting property. If you cast a spell that is first level or higher, but instead of selecting an enemy combatant and chose an ally instead, they will be able to take a reaction immediately after that spell has been cast on them and make one single weapon attack against a creature of your choice that you see. As you are the one issuing the command, you are the one who gets to choose the target, and if the target is out of the immediate range of the ally, they can use a ranged attack if required. The intent, however, is that you would command ranged allies to attack targets within their ranged weapons, and allies who use melee-related attacks to attack a creature that is standing next to them. If, however, the spell itself allows you to target multiple allies, you will get to choose which one can actually make that attack. But there is one thing that you need to keep in mind. If the ally has already used their reaction before you were commanding them to take a reaction, they will be unable to do so. That is because you only get one reaction per turn. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you target an ally with something that is going to damage them, they will suffer that damage, as the intent is really to cast something that is going to be beneficial to them, such as a healing spell, rather than hurt them, although evil characters might still do that anyway. This doesn't really require any setup in the Actions tab, as most anything that you will be using as part of this is already there, such as all of your spells. But if you have a DM who wants a full audit trail in their chat logs essentially, it is best to do, and you can simply do that by dragging and dropping this into place, and I'm going to just scroll somewhere safe. There we go. And it will create a new powers group. And what you want to actually do here, I'm just going to switch this to group, is put this into the order domain. So if you just type in order domain and then hit tab, it will rename that power group. Now, if the DM wants a chat audit log, all you have to do is click this and it will show up in the chat. However, there still is a uses limitation as a side effect of this feature, and it's really dictated by the total number of spell slots that you have available. If you've burnt through all of your spell slots, you won't have any spells to be able to make use of this. And because it's restricted to first level or higher, you can't use cantrips for this. But that is everything you need to know in relation to Voice of Authority, so let's move on to the next feature. When your character reaches level 2, they will gain access to the Channel Divinity Order's Demand feature, which allows your character to charm a large number of creatures who are within 30 feet of your character. They must be able to see or hear you, and once the demand has been made, they will be required to make a wisdom saving throw or be charmed until the end of your next turn, or until a given charmed creature takes damage. For example, this could be given as a command to stop a rabble of some kind, and you can even command someone who has failed their saving throw to drop whatever they are holding, so it's great for crowd control. And it essentially gives your party time to regain control of a situation that has gotten out of hand. Now, the thing about this particular Channel Divinity feature is that it is linked directly to your primary Channel Divinity capabilities. So we're going to want to go through and ensure that we've created an appropriate power group to link these two things together, because they do share a usage limitation. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag Channel Divinity from the primary Cleric class sheet and drop it into place. Then I'm going to create a new group called Channel Divinity. Much like that. I'm also going to rename this to Turn on Dead, because as you can see here, that's what this is supposed to represent. I'm going to call this Turn on Dead. I'm also going to now drag in our Order's Demand feature and drop that into place, and then ensure that it is also part of the Channel Divinity group. Now that we have these two things in place, I'm going to modify the group itself to restrict the total number of daily uses to be once daily. And as our character levels, we will slowly increase this to the maximum of 3 daily uses. And the reason I'm doing this is because now if I go through and use that Channel Divinity here, it will also tag this one as being used. And when the character completes a long rest, they will regain the use of this particular feature. So this is exactly what we want it to do. The only thing that we have to do is ensure that everything is set up for our base stats. Now for a cleric, that means that we want to ensure that everything in here is set up to be based off of the wisdom stat. And what that will do is it will ensure that any saving throws that have to be made are correctly calculated for each of these spells, and you don't have to worry about going through and setting things up. The other advantage we have here is that both the Turn Undead and the Charmed effect are already in place. So you don't need to worry about any additional setup beyond that. Now, as it is tied to your Channel Divinity feature, which means that you will only have one use until your character reaches level 6, where you will finally gain a second use, and eventually at level 18 you will gain your third use. This means that at levels 6 and at levels 18, we'll want to modify that Channel Divinity daily use aspect to be able to go through and ensure that it's there. So let's move on to level 6, where your character is going to acquire the Embodiment of the Law feature that allows you to take an enchantment spell that has a normal casting time of 1 action and turn it into a spell that can be used as a bonus action. For example, the Bless spell normally takes 1 action to cast, but as it falls under the enchantment school of spells, you will now be able to cast it as a bonus action instead. However, this can only be done if your character has not already cast a spell during the same turn, as that restriction still comes into play. There is also a limit to how many times your character can use this feature before they will need to complete a long rest to regain any expended uses. As a result, we will want to ensure that we add this to our Actions tab in the Cleric Order group, Order Domain. I'm going to copy this. And there we go. And we want to flip this over to Preparation. And because the number of uses is equal to your character's Wisdom modifier, which in this character's case is +4, we want to ensure that this gets set up as 4 uses per day. And if we switch this back to combat mode, we can now see that we have 4 pips here that will allow us to use this over the course of a day, and once used, it will disappear from our ability to use. We can complete a long rest, and then once we do that, we will regain all of our expended uses. Additionally, because this character is now level 6, we will want to ensure that we modify the number of uses for our Channel Divinity features here. And that is now 2 daily uses. And as you can see, we at least now have the ability to use either one of these features up until both uses are essentially used. Once your character has reached level 8, they will gain access to the Divine Strike of the Order feature that allows your character to add Divine Energy to any weapon damage. The weapon types that you can add this damage to are your typical melee or ranged weapons, not any other spell. However, when your character successfully hits their target, you can add an extra 1d8 of psychic damage to the weapon's total damage, such that if your character was using a normal mace, you would be able to add 1d8 psychic damage on top of the normal 1d6 bludgeoning damage that your character did. When your character reaches level 14, you will be able to increase the total amount of extra damage to 2d8 points of psychic damage. So we'll have to be cognizant of that when our character reaches level 14. Setting this up, however, is not an overly difficult process. All we have to do is add this to our order domain. We already have the psychic damage here. And the way this is going to work is that when you're in a combat situation, you would add this effect to yourself. Once added, you would then roll your damage. And I'm going to show you how that works. So we can see in this particular case, we have our Cleric of the Order domain inside of the combat tracker. I'm going to set the action token to our Cleric, and then I'm going to have this Cleric go through and target the Succubus. There we go. Now when I make my attack, and I'm simply going to use this character's Warhammer. Yeah, it's a melee weapon. So I'm going to roll the attack, which in this case is a critical fail. Let's see, that's still going to be a miss. And there, finally, we have a hit. Now, before I roll the damage, what I want to do is I want to add the Divine Strike effect to my character. And you'll see that when we do this, it will add the effect to our combat tracker under our character. Now I want to go ahead and roll the damage for the Warhammer. And you'll see that we now have 2 d8 of die that got rolled. One for the weapon, the other for the effect. And the effect has now gone away. However, when our character reaches level 14, we'll want to go back and make sure that we modify the damage that Divine Strike is going to do. By default, it's 1d8 psychic damage. At level 14, it's going to be 2d8 psychic damage. And the final feature that your character is going to gain is called Order's Wrath, and it happens when your character reaches level 17. This feature allows your character to curse a creature you just hit with your Divine Strike feature, and that curse will remain in place until the start of your next turn or until the creature suffers damage from another attack. When someone else hits and does damage to the creature you have just cursed, that creature will suffer an additional 2d8 psychic damage, just as if you had cast Divine Strike of your own. However, there is a usage limitation in that you can only curse a creature once per turn by using this feature. That means that you would not be able to curse all of the creatures on the battlefield, as you are limited to a single creature. But when the next turn comes around, if that creature that you initially cursed is now dead or out of the fight, you can choose to curse another creature. There is no other limitation associated with that. It's limited to once per turn, but you can continue to do so for the entire combat scenario. So let's go ahead and set this up. Now, in this particular case, we're going to drop it into place. We're going to move it into the order domain. And as you can see here, it has 2d8 psychic damage. But Fantasy Grounds has set this up as a damage indicator. What that means is that when someone else hits that creature that you have just cursed, you will want to ensure that you target them and then click on the damage that is being done. Now, in this case, I already have the succubus targeted in the combat tracker. That's why I did the damage to the succubus. So let's say, for example, that the ape here had the action turn. So I'm going to do that now. The ape attacks the succubus and does damage. Excellent. So they've hit, they do their damage, and then you come in behind and apply additional damage to that by either clicking on it if you already have that creature targeted, or by dragging and dropping it onto the succubus itself so that the damage gets applied. Now, the last thing that you have to deal with in relation to your character is when they hit level 18, they will now be able to make use of 3 channel divinity calls. That means that we need to adjust this to 3 total daily uses, and it gives us the ability to alternate which feature we're going to choose. The order domain definitely has a few options that make controlling large parties of mobs a bit easier, but I think some players are going to have issues playing this kind of character. I say this because a lot of times players don't take their deities into account when it comes to how they play their characters, but in this case it's pretty much a requirement. However, for example, an evil character who happens to worship Bane is going to have to take Bane's ideals into account when they're commanding other characters or creatures. Whereas a cleric who happens to worship Tyr, for example, will have to take into that god's ideals into account when choosing to command a creature and deciding what that command is going to entail. That's what I mean, trying to apply what their god's ideals are to their commands. Players might have an issue with that in the sense that they want to be able to control masses of characters or mobs, but not necessarily consider the side effects of what that could be in relation to their deity. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.